Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. So today was the funeral for Her Majesty the Queen, Queen Elizabeth II, Queen of Great Britain, of the United Kingdom, and of Canada, and numerous other countries around the world, the Commonwealth, etc. And I thought I'd reach out to a gentleman I've had the privilege of interviewing before, who's a former SAS soldier, a writer, a veterans campaigner, and a public speaker, someone who is coming to us from the UK, and someone who has posted quite eloquently about his respect for the Queen and his honor in service, serving in the armed forces for the United Kingdom. Robin Horsfall, how are you, sir?
Good evening, Brian. I'm well, thanks.
Thank you so much for
sad day.
It's a very sad day, but you know, I thought it was a beautiful day to honor her. It was really quite moving, and I think numerous different parts of the day were moving. Tell me what your impressions were as a former member of the armed services.
I think the day as a whole made me enormously proud that we could revere and honor somebody who's been with us for all of our lives, in most cases, for over 70 years as Queen, as the symbolic head of state for our nation and our Commonwealth. To be able to put on such an amazing display of pomp and circumstance and duty and honor, with the amazing scenes of Westminster Abbey and Windsor Castle, and the history that goes with it, that's not just British history, it's the history of many, many places in the world. And to put it on with such great dignity, it is the correct word is actually awesome. It really belongs in that category.
It was a state funeral, but it was also a military funeral, and the armed services played a very significant role for myself as a Canadian. I was really honored that the Royal Canadian Mounted Police actually led the procession out of the church, out of the Abbey. Tell me a little bit about what you thought of it as a former member of the armed services.
Well, members of the armed services who have all countries that have their head of state as the Queen, now the King, swear allegiance to the Queen, the monarch. And that's something far, far deeper than most people realize. When you're a 17, 18-year-old young man or woman joining the armed forces and you swear allegiance to Her Majesty the Queen, her heir and successors, and all generals and officers set above you, that's not quite as meaningful at that age as it is as life goes by, as you serve your years, as you start to realize that the person who's set above you as the commander-in-chief is setting such an enormous standard of decency and dignity over such a huge period of time that it doesn't matter who the government is. Because, I mean, you could imagine if your armed forces were swearing allegiance to Pierre Trudeau or to Boris Johnson or something like that, every few years you'd have to change that allegiance. And if they went off the rails and went wrong, there's no telling what would happen. But when you've got a constitutional monarch and your armed forces swear allegiance to that monarch, there's continuity, there's stability, and there's the most enormous amount of respect that goes with the example that that person sets to you, like a parent, like a grandparent, over an immense period of time. And you don't only end up respecting that person, you end up revering and loving them as well.
You know, in the United States, they swear allegiance to the Constitution of the United States, a piece of paper. In Canada, in the UK, we swear allegiance to the Queen, and we have pictures of her. That oath is personified in an individual, the monarch. Yeah. Do you really think that's different?
I think it's very different. I have wholehearted respect for the American Constitution and the way it's written, and the very enormously clever people that wrote it. And it manages to do the job, sometimes only just, but it does a marvelous job. But there's no face to it. There's no personality. There's no heart. Those of us who have had Queen Elizabeth with us for 70 years, I mean, she was Queen 5 years before I was born, and I'm 65 years old. So I know no other Queen. I'm Elizabethan. And when I was a little child, I remember being at my mother's knee, waving a flag as she visited our local town. I remember going to the cinema on a Saturday morning matinee as a child, and we played the national anthem, and there was a film of her riding a horse on her birthday on Horse Guards Parade in London, and we all had to stand to attention and salute before we left the cinema. And those are memories of the 1960s. We didn't just lose a queen. We lost, I referred to her recently as the mother of our world. And for many of us, she was the mother of our world.
What do you think the reception to King Charles? Is it the second or the third? The third, I guess.
Charles III, yeah.
What do you think of that so far?
He's waited all his life to become king, and he's done the most wonderful job in waiting. And I've met him several times, and he's a genuinely loving and caring and nice human being. And that holds him in great stead. And he's got to follow in his mother's footsteps. And sadly, some of the lower people in the press will be trying to make comparisons on the first day. You could see from the last week how very, very much he loved his mother, how deep that love was, and how grief-stricken he was. He will follow her example. Sad people will make comparisons between the two. He's got to take his own path and set his own way. But I know with all my heart that he has the decency and the courage to carry the same standards forward for the rest of his life as well.
We're chatting tonight with Robin Horsfall, who is a former member of the armed services in the UK. He's in the United Kingdom right now. And we're talking about the Queen's funeral that happened today. We're going to take a break for some messages and be back in just 2 minutes with Robin for some more on the pomp and circumstance that I think half the world may have seen on their televisions today. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga Night 60. Well, I got up at 5 a.m. this morning, my time, so that I could watch the Queen's funeral, including the procession to the Abbey, the funeral, the procession out, etc. It was really quite spectacular. We're joined tonight with Robin Horsfall, who is a former SAS officer. Robin, tell us what SAS is, please.
SAS is Special Air Service Regiment. They're the special forces of the British Army. And
where did you serve, sir?
Oh, lots and lots, many places. I joined the British Army when I was 15 years old.
15 years old, you joined the Army?
School leaving age was 15 in 1972, and I immediately joined the Army as a junior soldier. At the age of 17, I became a paratrooper. At the age of 21, I was an SAS soldier. I left the British Army at the age of 28 and served in several foreign armies after that, until my wife put her foot down and said, that's enough.
You served in foreign armies? Really?
Yeah. I was in the army of Sri Lanka, the army of the Oman, and the army of Mozambique, and fought in 3 different wars there. So yeah, I saw an awful lot of different wars and different actions. I did 5 tours of Northern Ireland with the British Army. I was in the Falklands War, and I was on that famous raid in the Iranian embassy in 1980 when we rescued 19 hostages live on television.
And you've recently been a writer and a frequent commentator on military activities, international affairs, what's going on in Ukraine, etc. Is that not right?
Yeah, yeah. I'm a bit of a blogger on LinkedIn and Facebook. I've got 5 books on Amazon at the moment. I'm hoping to write a novel this year. I love writing. It's something I can do. I have some physical problems that now I've had cancer and I broke my neck. So sitting down and writing and standing up and talking is about the most I can do. But I find I get a great deal of satisfaction from putting across opinions that aren't controlled or influenced by editors or other people. I do pretty much a daily blog on what's happening in Ukraine. I've been quiet for a few days because I've concentrated a lot on the Queen's funeral, which meant a huge amount to me. And then get back tomorrow that we've had some closure, and I will start writing about Ukraine again.
I've enjoyed reading your posts on Ukraine, and we did an interview previously about what you thought was going on in Ukraine, and thank you for that. And I guess that's one of the reasons why I wanted to reach out to you about the Queen's funeral, because you were so eloquent of eloquent about what was going on in Ukraine and different military issues, and then you spoke so eloquently in the last couple of days about your love for the Queen and how you felt so honored to serve in her forces and to pledge allegiance to her. And so I thought that it would be really interesting to reach out and understand what it's like to actually serve in an army when you've pled allegiance to a monarch. And so thank you for joining us in that regard. The amount of different militaries from around the world, around the Commonwealth, I guess, and the presence and what the commentators that I heard on television said, I'm not sure if this is actually the case, but what they said is all those different people actually are serving members of armies. They're not just there for the pageantry. They were actually serving members. Is that your understanding?
I'm not really sure. What I am absolutely sure of is that today, generals, kings, presidents, representatives from all over the world came and bowed their heads in respect to this enormously special human being, not just because she was a queen, but because of who she was, because of the example she set for her whole life, because she dedicated herself from the age of 21 to her entire people and never, not once, ever let them down. It's that reverence is for the human being, for the person, not just for the fact that they were a monarch.
You know, it's interesting. There were, I think, 5 Canadian prime ministers in attendance and 3 governor generals, which is the Queen's representative in Canada as head of state. You're right that not only did the current leaders of the world attend, but a lot of historical leaders of the world attended.
Well, you can imagine. I mean, she became queen when Truman was the president of the United States. I mean, she's lived as queen through every president since the end of the Second World War. That's just phenomenal. Every president, every prime minister, every king, every war, every change of government, she has been there steady right the way through, never judging, never taking a particular side, always being above the fight, always hoping that she can pull things back together and set that example and that standard of decency that I don't think is achievable by somebody who has to fight politically for power. I don't think you're ever going to achieve that same kind of personal standard. You might accidentally fall upon it, but it's not going to be there as standard for a lifetime. It's never going to be. Nobody else can do that.
I think I heard that her first prime minister was Winston Churchill, and he was born 100 years previous exactly to the year of her current prime minister.
Yeah, yeah. Churchill, when she became queen, was very much old aristocracy who wanted to hold on to empire. And there are reports that she convinced him that that wasn't the path to the future, that it was time to let things go, to give people their own dominions and eventually their own governments, and to let them and to have a commonwealth rather than a British Commonwealth. And it clearly has been successful in many ways.
Well, I think it was just last year that then Prince Charles, currently King Charles, went to the Caribbean. I think it was Barbados, was it not, or Jamaica? I can't remember. And presided over that country becoming a republic and no longer having the Queen as head of state, albeit still remaining in the Commonwealth.
Sure, and that things change. The world turns. Things move on. But you don't achieve longevity by oppressing people. You achieve it by cooperating with people.
One of the things that any student of history has to be enthralled with is the history of the British Navy. And I understand you were in armed services, but the fact that there were sailors that were actually pulling her gun carriage that carried the casket, I thought was really quite poignant when thinking about the history of the British Navy.
Yeah, well, that tradition goes back to a previous king, and I'm not exactly sure which one it was, but it's in the last 100 years. The horses got too skittish to pull the gun carriage, and they were out of control. So the naval rating said, okay, if the horses won't do it, we will pull the carriage for the king's funeral. And that's how that tradition began. And now it's traditional for the Navy to pull the gun carriage.
Now you're in the United Kingdom, but you're not in London anymore. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm in South Wales. This is where I live, in the mountains in the valleys of South Wales. Yeah.
And do people in Wales get up and watch the funeral just like people in London and Toronto did?
Oh, sure. I mean, you've got to remember that the Queen was the Queen of Britain. The King is the King of Britain. That's England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. And so they're all united. It's called the United Kingdom for that reason. And our kings have been Welsh. The Tudors were Welsh. The Stuarts were Scottish. So we've had Scottish and Welsh kings all as part of our history. Henry VIII was Welsh. He was a Tudor. So a lot of people need to understand that we're all blended together. I mean, we live over these invisible lines, and in some places we speak different languages, but we're all united under that one monarch.
I thought that the honor that the Queen received in Edinburgh was very telling in regards to that, you didn't hear much about Scottish independence during that couple of days in Edinburgh. And then I understand that King Charles actually recently went to Wales and did a whole speech in Welsh. That's
right, yeah, which is a difficult language. It really is a difficult language to learn. I hope to do it myself later this year. Until he became king, he was the Prince of Wales. And now Prince William is the Prince of Wales. And there will be a special ceremony at Carnarvon Castle probably next year to actually officially appoint Prince William the Prince of Wales. And that goes back 800 years, that tradition. And it's quite a complicated story, but essentially peace was made with the Welsh by the King of England saying, my first son will be your prince. And it goes back 800 years, that tradition. Yeah.
And George, who I guess will be King George VII, was also in attendance.
Yes, that's right. You've got 3 generations of future monarchs there in the hall today, in the cathedral today. You know, you've got King Charles, Prince William, and Prince George. And that probably gives confidence for the future of the monarchy for another 100 years.
Do you think that William's wife, Kate, becoming the Princess of Wales has particular significance, given that there hasn't been a Princess of Wales for the last 25 years?
I haven't really thought about that. I think to some degree we just take it as for granted. When Princess Diana was sadly killed in a car accident, that title just was left on the shelf, and now it's going to be taken off the shelf. And I think that's a nice thing rather than a special thing.
Last year, Queen Elizabeth asked that Charles's wife Camilla be called Queen Consort. And what do you think of the reception to her so far?
I think that she does an extraordinarily good job. They are clearly besotted with one another. I'm not quite sure how titles in these particular circumstances are worked out and established. But it seems that everybody's happy with the way things are. And I don't think it's wise for those of us that don't understand it too deeply to look too deeply into it. Generosity of spirit is what we all need under certain circumstances. What really, really winds me up and gets me annoyed is when the press start to look for insignificant little things and then read something into it or deconstruct it and turn it into some kind of bad thing about another human being, which is one of the terrible burdens that anybody in the public eye has to suffer constantly. And I tell you, tomorrow the drivel will be out there, the nonsense will be out there in the press, deconstructing everything that happened today and every look in somebody's eye and every trip that somebody made and try to make something bad or terrible out of it.
Well, I saw already a big video of some spider landing on the letter that the message that Charles wrote to his mother that was on top of the flowers on the casket. So the fact that there was a spider that made his way in or her way in obviously is newsworthy.
Must have been Incy Wincy, I guess.
I think so. But let's talk about a couple things. So Harry. Prince Harry was allowed to wear his military uniform for the tribute that the grandchildren did, standing vigil for their grandmother. But then he wasn't allowed to wear the military uniform today. But he actually served in Afghanistan, I think, did he not? And he was therefore an active member of the military services. Why is it appropriate for him to be stripped of those military privileges?
Well, he wasn't stripped of them. When he separated himself from his duties as a serving member of the royal family voluntarily, he no longer had an appointment as a colonel commandant or an honorary colonel of a regiment, and because he's no longer a serving honorary colonel or honorary commandant to a regiment, then he's not entitled to wear that uniform. So it wasn't a punishment or anything else of that nature. It was simply of the fact that he's no longer serving. And so, whereas the other people, Prince Andrew as well, no longer serving, not a colonel commandant, so not an honorary colonel to a regiment, so not wearing the uniform for the same reasons. The others are.
But he was allowed during the vigil. Why was he allowed during the vigil?
Well, I would imagine that somebody made special dispensation for him to wear his uniform as the uniform of the regiment that he previously served with for a special reason.
Right.
And I wholeheartedly support that too.
We're chatting with Robin Horsfall tonight about the Queen's funeral. We're going to take a break for some messages and be back in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Today, the only queen that I've ever known was buried. The only queen that I think 85% of people in the United Kingdom ever knew was buried. 96, 97 years old, I think it was, and she served for 70 years on the throne. Robin, I had the privilege of meeting the Queen in 1976. I was invited because of a political position I had to go to the opening of the Olympic Games in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. And the Queen was there to open those games, and I was invited to a special reception with the Queen, with Prince Philip, with Prince Charles at the time. And I shook hands with all of them. I was one of the younger people maybe in attendance, and so I may have been given special privileges. My grandfather served in the Canadian War Munitions Board during World War II. He was what in Canada were called dollar-a-year men, and they were seconded by their companies and worked for the Canadian government for $1 a year in exchange for providing all the organizational managerial activities to organize Canada's war effort. And my grandfather actually served with I guess it was Prince Charles' uncle, Lord Mountbatten, on a Commonwealth munitions board at the time, and I pointed that out to the prince, and he said he remembered the meeting. He didn't remember meeting my grandfather, but he remembered the meeting that he attended, where he was responsible for thanking all the individuals from around the Commonwealth that served during that war munitions. I met the prince and I met the Queen, Prince Charles, and I met the Queen, and had maybe a 15-second chat with her, so not nearly as long as I had with Prince Philip. But it was incredible that she spoke to numerous different people. And this was in a ballroom in the Queen Elizabeth Hotel in downtown Montreal, opening of the Olympics. And I guess lots of people have commented about, how personable she was and how she had this ability to make people feel like she actually wanted to meet you and wanted to have a little chat with you. And I was astounded that she did. And that Prince Philip actually spent probably 2 or 3 minutes chatting with me about his uncle, about war munitions, about World War II, about the role that civilians had in the war effort. Because my grandfather was wounded at Vimy Ridge in World War I, and so obviously did not serve. He was given an award at the time. I can't remember what the award was, frankly. And then I was honored in when would it have been? Sometime about 11 years ago, by getting the Queen's Golden Jubilee Award in Canada for my public service. So I've got my own little connection to the Queen, and I'm probably therefore a monarchist in Canada, which is not something everybody is historically, but I think today probably most of Canada is. Tell me when you met the Queen.
I was, when I was a 17-year-old paratrooper, I was on parade in 1974 when she presented the colours to my regiment. And one thing I'd like to add to that is that my regiment at that time was the Parachute Regiment. And Prince Charles, King Charles now, is the Colonel Commandant of the Parachute Regiment. He did his jumps with us in the 1970s. So we're in safe hands. I mean, we've got a member of the Parachute Regiment as the King for the first time.
And he actually jumped out of the airplane.
Oh yeah, he did our training. He did our jumps, on military jumps with us as well. And there are many photographs that you can find online of Prince Charles then doing his jumps with the Parachute Regiment. And he was extraordinarily popular when he did. And he joined in. He did everything he was allowed to do with us. And he's still the Colonel Commandant. I'm not sure if that changes now that he's King. I expect it will. But he wears that maroon beret with the cap badge very, very proudly. That's the nearest I ever got to the Queen. I met Prince Charles when he visited the SAS several times. I met Princess Anne and spoke to her several times when she visited us as well. And it's important to remember that they're not celebrities, they're human beings. And they have the same trials and tribulations as the rest of us. but they have an extraordinarily difficult and important job to do. And that job is representing us as people. They represent us wherever they go. Wherever I've been around the world, there's been a picture in the embassy, and people recognized the face of the Queen wherever I went, and they expected British people to come up to the standards that she set for us. Fair play, decency, honesty, loyalty, family, and all those other attributes that people imagine that are British in many ways. She was a representative of all of her people. Now, we had to try and live up to that standard. And of course, 99.9% of us never ever achieved anything like the standard that she set. But it gave us something to aspire to, something to be proud of. I can't imagine going abroad and seeing the face of one of my prime ministers as something I aspire to be, even though in some cases I admire them and the work they do. Not the same thing at all.
Not the same thing at all. But it's interesting that not only was she head of government, head of state, head of armed forces, she was head of the Church of England.
Yeah, well, that tradition comes from the breakaway of King Henry VIII from the Catholic Church in the 1600s, 1500s, 16th century, and that he made himself king. He made himself, he didn't make himself king, he made himself head of the Church of England and broke away from the Catholic Church. And that breakaway still continues. So the monarch is the head of the Church of England still.
Do you think that's surprising to people, or is that understood and normal? That she has this religious role as well?
I don't think they have a religious role in terms of being priestly or bishops, but they, again, it's a symbolic position now. It means that the Queen or the monarch is a Christian of a Christian state. And although we have citizens that are highly respected from all other religions living in our nation, our Queen is still the head of the Church of England, which is the Anglican Church.
There were representatives of several different denominations, Christian denominations, including a Catholic cardinal that spoke some of the prayers of the people today in the service, but none from Judaism or Islam.
Well, it was very much a Christian event today. As you can tell, it was held in Christian churches. It didn't mean that anybody was rejected or anybody wasn't allowed to come. I'm sure that there were many people from other faiths that were in the congregation today, but it is the death of the head of the Church of England is a Christian ceremony.
Why do you think she chose to be buried at Windsor Castle in St. George Chapel rather than in Westminster Abbey?
Well, I can only imagine, because I don't know, but it's because that's where Prince Philip was. And so that's where he is, and she's going back to be laid at rest with her husband.
And that's where her parents are, I understand, and they're going to be all in the same chapel. But it is interesting that a lot of her forefathers and a lot of the most important kings and queens in British history are in Westminster Abbey, and she chose not to be there.
Yeah, I think it's more personal. And again, it's the family crypt is below the King George V Chapel, and her parents are there. Her husband is there, and now she's there. I think everybody can understand why you would want to be there. I certainly would under those circumstances.
As they went by Buckingham Palace, I guess they go by quite a large statue tribute to Queen Victoria, and undoubtedly, Queen Victoria was one of the most important monarchs in British history, ruling over most of the time when the empire was at its zenith. But a lot of people have said that this second Elizabethan era has been very special, the longest. Some people call her, Great Elizabeth. What type of monument do you think, and where will a monument be for Queen Elizabeth II?
I think there's bound to be something enormously special put up to her. I think it would be my choice to put it at Windsor with that great and ancient castle as something different rather than in the streets of London. I think Windsor seems to have been the home that she loved very much. I'm sure there'll be something put up in Balmoral in Scotland. We'll see. Wherever it is, it'll be enormously special. You mentioned Queen Elizabeth I and Queen Victoria. Elizabeth I was the first Protestant queen and started to establish the British Empire. Queen Victoria ruled over the British Empire when it was at its zenith, and when it ruled a third of the world. And Queen Elizabeth II has seen the end of that empire and allowed it to pass with great dignity. But it's surprising that those three queens are the most famous and most well known of all the kings and queens.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I was impressed, frankly, at the role that Princess Anne played today and for the last 10 days. That she seems to have played a far more important, critical at the front role than I was expecting her to play, and that she's played in the past.
Oh, she's a formidable person. She carries authority. She's incredibly well researched when she comes to talk to people. She doesn't ask bland, simple questions. She'll turn up at a theatre and ask you about how the show was put together. She turned up at the SAS and started asking me about the weapons and how we entered rooms and the explosives. And it was a bit of a step back because you weren't used to somebody asking such in-depth questions about your work. She's an accomplished athlete. She was an Olympian with riding horses. She's an extraordinarily special person and very, very tough cookie in her own right. She commands a great deal of respect, and yet again, enormously pleasant to spend time with.
We're chatting tonight with Robin Horsfall, who is a former SAS, a member of the United Kingdom forces, about Queen Elizabeth and her funeral. We're going to take a final break, and come back with some concluding comments in just a minute. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga Night 60. I'm not sure about you, but I woke up at 5 o'clock this morning, turned on the telly so that I could watch the procession going into Westminster Abbey, then the funeral, then the procession out and around Buckingham Palace, and then on to Windsor, etc., of Queen Elizabeth II and her funeral. I was a little bit taken aback, frankly. I have to be honest, when after both services, the final song, the final hymn was God Save the King. I guess it's only the second or third time that I've heard God Save the King ever sung. It is interesting, Robin, that as you said when we just started the show, that world leaders from around the world, not just countries where the Queen is head of state, not just countries that are part of the Commonwealth, but from around the world, came to London for this. And London really showed itself off at its best from a pageantry standpoint. The flags, the pomp and circumstance, the military bands, the military soldiers, the unbelievably gorgeous churches and buildings. It really was. It really did harken back to the zenith of the British Empire. But Britain isn't that anymore, and London's not the capital of the world anymore. Do you think this is sort of a last gasp for the life of the importance of Britain, or maybe it's the start of some new importance for Britain? What do you think?
Well, I suppose history teaches us that power flows, things come, things go, things change. You mentioned London. London goes back 2,000 years. The Romans built London, called it Londinium, over the Thames 2,000 years ago. London is still there. You can dig up the Roman ruins in London. It's not just the recent past. There are 2,000 years of history in around. There's 1,000 years of English and then British monarchy that resides in London, but not just in London, in other cities and towns that were capitals of Britain before London and capitals of England before London. There's so much history there. There's so much there. And the future holds what the future holds. I know that that history will still be there, no matter what. Politics will change, history will change, wars will come, people will go, languages will change. But the Roman ruins will still be sat there under London in another 1,000 years.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau of Canada supposedly said that he thought that Canada would have George, William's son, as their head of state, as our head of state. And so he obviously indicated that he thought that the monarchy would last, not only in Great Britain, but in parts of the Commonwealth, specifically for Canada, for at least another couple of generations. What do you think?
I personally hope he's right, but the people of Canada will decide that. The people of Australia will decide about Australia. The people of New Zealand will decide about New Zealand. But I think what people witnessed today and over the last week will change a lot of minds. I think the value of what we've just lost only became clear to us when we lost it. We've lost something so enormously special and valuable that it suddenly made us think, do we want to keep that? I think we do.
You know, there's a couple of times that I was really moved today, and I'll mention them if I could. One was seeing the Canadian Royal Mounted Police at the lead of the procession out of Westminster Abbey, and I thought that was a special honor that Canada was provided. And I understand it's because Queen Elizabeth felt very strongly about the Canadian Mounted Police. I thought it was very poignant that we had, as I said, I think 5 Canadian prime ministers, current and historic, past, all there. Jacques Chrétien, Paul Martin, Kim Campbell, Stephen Harper, and Justin Trudeau, and several governors general that are our head of state. I felt, you know, this closer connection to the royal family, to Great Britain, to the Commonwealth, given that connection to Canada. But then I also, you know, was interested when the camera zoomed in on the Prime Minister of New Zealand. And similarly, I felt this connection that I was surprised I felt, that I think the British Commonwealth really does have that connection. The Commonwealth has this connection with different countries around the world. I also really appreciated the fact that different religious leaders from different denominations were invited to participate in the prayers of the people that were recited near the end of the service. Were there specific times that you were particularly moved during the day?
Oh yeah, I shed several tears today for at many different points. It's hard to remember exactly what those points were, but I think the one that really will stay in my mind was when the coffin is going down into the crypt and the choristers are singing and the bishop is speaking and you've got closure and you know that's the end. It's done. That's the point, I think, for me.
You know, it's interesting to me, Robin. There are a few times that I think I can clearly remember, you know, where I was and what I was doing when I watched something. And the royal wedding of Charles and Diana was one. The funeral of Diana was another. Maybe 9/11 was another. Maybe when I first heard that Richard Nixon had resigned was another. But for me in my life, there's not that many more. And today was one of those parts of history that I'm so glad that I got up to watch and probably shared with a third to half the world that I understand predictions we're watching today. How do you feel about that? Is this one of those important days in history?
Yeah, it is. If you didn't see the ceremony today, then you missed one of the most magnificent scenes that you will ever have the chance to see in your lifetime. You missed it. It was magnificent. It was majestic. It was color and music and sadness and family and nationhood and international symbolism. It had so much, and so much that people should aspire to. You have to see it. If you didn't see it, then find it. Go on YouTube, go on television, and sit back and enjoy and watch it, because it should stay in your heart forever, whether you're 4 years old or 400 years old.
Robin Horsfall, former SAS member of the United Kingdom Armed Services. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing with us your thoughts about today's funeral of Queen Elizabeth II. God save the Queen and God save the King.
God save the King.
Thank you, sir. That's our show for tonight. Thanks for joining us. Good night, everybody.